Hi, and my name is Darren. I love discussing African affairs on the African continent, and this is going to be the last video that I make in 2025. So bye-bye 2025 and welcome to 2026, which will be tomorrow. So today is 31st, and we shall be discussing a whole new conversation. What do we foresee in 2026? What are some of the things that we predict to happen in 2026? But anyway, we're not going so far. Now, let's talk about the River Nile. I was watching an interview of a gentleman called Badir. He's a foreign minister for Egypt, and he was in Middle East having a discussion, and was asked about the dam in Ethiopia, the one that was built along River Nile. And he came out and said, going forward, no country is going to be able to put anything on that river without having consultations with other countries that are involved in using the River Nile itself. And when you look at how many countries how many countries use the River Nile, you'll find countries like Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda itself, Congo, you'll find South Sudan, Sudan itself, you'll find Ethiopia, and you'll find, of course, Egypt, up to when it gets into the Red Sea. And there's a whole, summit that usually happens to discuss what happens on that water. And the two countries, Ethiopia and Egypt, largely rely on the River Nile for fresh waters. And there are some agreements that were made as far as 1929 and 1956, and we're discussing on allocations of how water can flow, especially when it's going to the Red Sea. And Egypt had something like almost 75, and then the other percentage was going to Ethiopia. But those Ethiopia feels like they were very unfair, and more often have been going back and forth on how the water can be used. And let me be honest with you, right from Uganda here, you'll find, say in Egypt, in Uganda, you'll find the Egyptian Defense Force in Uganda. And one of the reasons they're here, not only for the diplomatic reasons, but they also, the diplomacy that I would talk about here, but yeah, they need to make sure that everything that is on that Nile, Uganda is not able to block it or do anything that can stop the flow of water from here to Egypt or to Ethiopia, because Ethiopia also is very aware that everything that happens right on the dam, they will start with Uganda, because Uganda must let this water flow very well so that the other countries benefit from it, which they use for crops, piped water, and all these things. River Nile is actually very fresh. It has very fresh waters for them that you can use, for consumption and agriculture and other things. That is why when the dam was launched this year, the Renaissance Dam, huge, the biggest probably in Africa, Egypt was not so happy because of how much it takes the dam to fill so that they are able to generate water and so on. They felt it's going to cause issues in levels of water, especially in Egypt. So that conflict is very deep, that you need to understand why the two countries usually fight over the Nile. I'm not saying they fight that there's a physical confrontation in terms of guns or anything, but it's always a tension discussion every time it comes to the table and put them together and say, now let's discuss what's happening on the Nile. Now there's a Blue Nile, of course, that one goes up to Ethiopia. And so anything that Ethiopia does on their side of the Nile definitely affects what happens in Egypt on the other side. Either it reduces the water levels that go into Egypt, or may it actually cause flooding, and a couple of things. However, Ethiopia feels that they took all the precautions to make sure that, and they feel they've done nothing wrong in launching their dam, in building such a huge dam in Ethiopia. And when they made that statement, I'm like, okay. I remembered when President Yoweri Museveni was talking about access to the ocean, and Kenyans went all up in arms, but there are international laws. You see, there are international laws that guide the usage of waters. Is it the ocean, or is it the rivers or the lakes, as long as those lakes especially are shared between countries? For example, whereas Lake Victoria, the huge part of it is in Uganda. There are things we can do on the lake, but we must have conversations with countries that actually also share the lake. Countries like Kenya, countries like Tanzania, countries like Rwanda, countries like Burundi, they have parts and bits of this lake. So something might flow from here going there. And sorry to bring back this memory, but if you remember the time that there was a genocide in Rwanda, bodies were dumped on the Rwandan side of Lake Victoria. And there was word that some fishermen here in Uganda could find some bodies in the water flowing towards the side of Uganda. So that's why I'm saying it's very important that discussions are had about waters. So I can tell the tension that and the mood at which we were speaking said nothing can be done on the River Nile again without consultations with other member states that actually use the river. But most importantly, that they must follow international laws. So you can't just wake up and say, maybe Uganda can't wake up and say, let's put a dam on River Nile in the side of it, and so that it blocks how much water actually goes in before it generates power, and then water flows towards the north. Egypt and Ethiopia and South Sudan and Sudan itself would come up in arms of how exactly we are using it here. So it cannot be a comfortable conversation that one can do with whatever they desire on that water body. It's impossible. And that's why you find guards, the UPDF and other armies protecting the things that happen along the River Nile. So, I mean, Ethiopia won. They already constructed a dam and moved on. But the flow of water, as we go ahead, as you people are always having conversations about climate change, and so how much water is going to be filling up the dam, and how is it going to affect Egypt on the other side? Because once it starts affecting Egypt on the other side, we shall find ourselves going back to a conversation where President Museveni and other presidents around the region are starting to have again discussions on why is this happening? How much water can you now take in? The regulations, because it's people's livelihoods along the River Nile. It's an interesting one that I think that you should find out. It's one of those treaties or discussions that whenever the treaties are had, many people don't pay attention to the issues of the River Nile, but I believe there are analysts who actually understand this better than I do. Personally, it's just a story that I read and it caught my attention, including watching that video. And I remember that I've tried to read some time back about the issues that can happen with the dam. Because I asked myself, why is the Egyptian Defense Force in Uganda? Or why do you see a lot of conversations about the River Nile? What does it mean to these countries that are using the River Nile along? So it's very important that you go ahead and get to know the geopolitics around the River Nile and the countries that actually use the Nile. My name is Darren. I'll see you in the next one. Happy New Year. We'll see you in 2026.